How's it going, people? Shay here. Uneven bounce. Hope you guys are well. So I'm playing Michael J. Fox tonight, going back to the future a little bit. We are going for a trip down memory lane, March 11th to the 15th, 2001, Kolkata, Eden Gardens, packed house. We had one of the greatest test matches of all time. India versus Australia. Australia proceeded to whoop India in the first test match in Mumbai by resounding 10 wickets. And obviously it was all to play for, so obviously going second test match. That being said, Australia went into the third innings with a 274-run lead after skittling India out for 171. The signs look very ominous. Looks like Australia are going to pull off the first Test Series victory in India since 1969. It wasn't to be, and Mr. VVS Laxman had other ideas, as we found out, with incredible encapsulating 281 coming number 3 to rescue India. They posted 657 for 7 declared, I believe, in their second innings. Left Australia to chase 384 to win and skilled them to win by 171 runs. Incredible stuff. And yeah, obviously we've got to get into it. I think obviously I just want to quickly mention before we get started, hopefully do discuss Harbhajan Singh as well, a raw 20-year-old off spinner who took 13 wickets in the match as well. I think we shouldn't not forget that. I'm sure Rajiv will mention it. Anyway, Rajiv's obviously been on at me to discuss this. And before I actually say Rajiv, I mean, I've got Rajiv Radhakrishnan with me. Apologies. Just to introduce Rajiv, obviously, again, he's been a long time guest on the show. Actually, my very first interview over a year ago now, pre-COVID. That's how long Rajiv's been coming on here. So thanks once again. And Rajiv, yeah, great to see you. How have you been?
Yes, all good. Getting a little bit bored in lockdown. It's been a year now, so looking forward to June the 21st, if not before.
Well, you're allowed 6 people, aren't you, in your private garden, I believe. As long as you've got a side gate, you can get them in. But yeah, I know it's great to have you back on. Honestly, Rajiv, if you don't know, occasional writer for the Cricketer, writes at FT as well. Very passionate cricket fan of today's times and yesteryear, hence this. Obviously, the show today, really good for me as well. Also, a 38-year-old. It's great to talk about obviously cricket now and everything with the T20 and T10, etc. But I'll tell you what, it's really great to watch and talk about cricket from my childhood, if you want to call it that. So yeah, wonderful to discuss. But Rajiv, it's over to you now, mate. I'm just going to let you crack on. I know you obviously got a lot to talk about the Test match, about the surrounding context, the cultural impact it had on Indian cricket. So yeah, the floor is yours, mate. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you for having me to discuss what is a very special goalpost in India's cricket history. And before we actually get to that event in March 2001, I think it's important to sort of see the context and the build-up to that. And that was probably the culmination of a lot of events that led to that end product that we which we so cherish. And just to, going throughout like sort of the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, I think the cricket was run by probably the big four. And when I say the big four, it was obviously England and Australia, and then West Indies as they rose throughout the 70s and 80s. It was them, and then South Africa in the 50s and 60s, just before apartheid came along, before they were kicked out because of apartheid reasons, and quite rightly so. So they were the four big cricketing nations. All the superstars came from there, whether it be Gary Sobers, Barry Richards, Don Bradmans a little bit before them, the Len Huttons, etc. So all the superstars were concentrated in those four countries. And then there was probably, because of that, there was probably a sort of a dismissive notion towards India, who had become a test nation in the early 30s. Pakistan didn't come around till the 1950s, Sri Lanka a lot later, and Bangladesh even later than that. So India, there was sort of a dismissive kind of feel towards them from sort of the Western nations and the West Indies. And I just felt that, if you look back at it now, they didn't give that respect. And it was just a sort of like a tag on tour. No one really cared about that series against India. But then in the 70s, a young man from Mumbai, Sunil Gavaskar, appeared. And he sort of took India to another level. But it was only him. And then in the 1980s, Kapil Dev came along, and he stood toe-to-toe with the other 2-3 great all-rounders of that era, Ian Botham, Imran Khan, etc. But there was still some kind of restraint with Indian cricket. And I don't want to use the word blame, but a lot of the Indian players were Marathi, coming from Mumbai, and the culture in Mumbai was to play cricket in a very correct form. And it still probably exists even today. So you look at the Marathi players, all their names generally end in Kar. So the Vengasarkars, the Tendulkars, the Gavaskars, the Manjrekars, they played textbook cricket, very proper MCC coaching manual. And, you know, for the traditionalists, for the purists, this is what they wanted to see. There was no switch hits or, you know, dill scoops, etc. None of that was in their repertoire. And whilst it was good to see that technique and, you know, putting that high price on your wicket, which they certainly did, to grind out those big scores and spending a lot of time at the crease, it didn't sort of lend itself to that kind of attacking brand of cricket, which we would come a bit later. So I think, without trying to sort of denigrate what Mumbai did, I still think that cultural kind of attitude held back Indian cricket longer than it should have done. And I think a reason for that is that they wanted to replicate how the English were playing. They saw the MCC in England as that's the correct way, so let's be like that. They wanted to be more English. They hadn't developed their own style. Let's follow that correct form of playing. And I mean, there's nothing wrong. I think you still need those kind of correct players, those kind of Rahul Dravids, who obviously was a key member of that match that we're going to be talking about. So you still need that, but I think we needed to sort of, and Dravid, by the way, he's not from Mumbai, he's from Bangalore. What we still needed, though, to sort of, India still needed that kind of different kind of batsman to shift gears, etc. And that came throughout the 80s. And then India as a nation started to sort of not be allowed to be bullied by others. And I'm not just talking about cricket, I'm just talking about general, even in economic terms. Late 90s, early 2000s, India started now becoming an economic powerhouse like it did in the 16th century. People will just say, well, you know what, the cycle is again turning and India is now becoming the economic powerhouse. It hasn't happened to the extent it should have, but the economics are out of the scope for this talk. So with the 80s, then we saw India win the World Cup in 1983. That was a huge boost. This is ODI cricket now. But that galvanized a huge new generation, people who would have been, you know, it was before my time. I would have been 4, so, you know, I didn't really understand it then. I wouldn't have known about it anyway. So the people born in sort of the late 60s, early 70s, who would have had good memories as children watching this, suddenly were inspired. And that's the reason, you know, a lot of those gentlemen in the late 60s, early 70s now started to filter into the Indian team in the mid-90s. Ganguly, Dravid, Laxman, Tendulkar. Okay, he came in at 16 and 89, but they're all the same age, the 4 of them. So 83 winning the World Cup, then 87 hosting the World Cup with their great friends Pakistan. That again was the first time now that a World Cup had been taken away from England. England held the first 3 World Cups in 75, 79, and 83. And India, that was a huge achievement for them to co-host the global tournament ahead of Australia, ahead of the West Indies. So, you know, that was now showing their muscle in the cricket community. And that now started to transcend into their actual playing. Now the players were coming through, as I mentioned. We can call it the pack of 4 there: Ganguly, Laxman, Dravid. 1996 they all came in. Tendulkar, same age, but 1989 as I said.
That England tour, I remember.
Yep, in 1996.
Series 1-0, yeah. That quartet was just, you know, well, not quartet, the trio, obviously. I've got Ganguly, Laxman, and Dravid. Kind of made their mark, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Laxman came in November 96, but yeah, Dravid and Ganguly made their debut at Lord's. Got 95, and Ganguly made 100. And then Tendulkar was now joined by his age group. He probably would have played a little with them during age group cricket, but he was shunted off into international cricket fast track, so he probably didn't play that much with them anyway. And then you had the likes of Kumble, senior leg spinner, coming in.
Srinath.
Srinath, yes, exactly.
Venkatesh Prasad was there as well, wasn't he?
96. I was just going to say, though, to caveat what you said, and you're quite right, the bowling was still an issue. I think the fast bowling, these guys would probably not get into an Australian side or an England side. All the other players I mentioned, they would get into all the other international sides. And I think India now, what we're seeing now is, yes, they've got a good set of fast bowlers, but at that time, they were struggling, and it's been a struggle until the very recent past that they've sorted that problem out. For a population of 1 billion, or let's say 500 million because it's men's cricket, you would have expected, more of those fast bowlers, but I guess they were absorbed into Pakistan during partition, and so the likes of Wasim, Waqar didn't get to play for India because of partition, and India lost out on those fast bowlers. So India nicely bubbling along and now starting to get more of a presence on the international scale, as I said, not just in cricket, but globally, economically, through that, and of course through Bollywood, of course. So, we're talking billion-dollar industries here. And then while this is going on, Australia have always been a strong powerhouse in cricket. If you look at the stats, they've definitely won the most amount of test matches proportionately, most World Cups, that they are the best team. But just in that late 80s period, they were suffering. They had lost a lot of players to the Packer circus, and Alan Border inherited a team in the mid-80s that was
lost the Ashes in 87 to England.
Indeed, but we don't forget they lost the Ashes to 85 to the great David Gower, so let's not forget that.
Of course, your favourite player. How could you forget that, David Gower?
Yeah, there you go. So,
can't do a show without David Gower being mentioned, can you, Rajiv?
You have to mention him. You have to mention David. So after David Gower's England battered Alan Border, and then Mike Gatting's team down under 18 months later, Australia were in a very low place, and they had to work out what they do. And I remember reading about it. Alan Border, they stuck with him as captain, and they said, look, we're going to invest in 4 or 5 players, and we're going to take things forward. And they culled a lot of the likes of Greg Ritchie, etc., who didn't sort of fit the character requirements of the team. And they said, well, who are we going to pick? So they said, we're going to stick with David Boone. We're going to stick with this young guy called Steve Waugh. He's 20 years old. He's only played 15 test matches. We're going to take Dean Jones, and we're going to take Merv Hughes. And Alan Border is going to lead this new crop, this new era. And Alan Border molded that team. And throughout the 90s, you saw how they evolved and developed. And the turnover of players was excellent. You had David Boone finished off at number 3. Ricky Ponting comes in. Okay, he started at number 3 a bit later. But there was a good turnover. Healy to Gilchrist, McDermott to McGrath. It was a good transition, and they rarely lost. So Australia now building up throughout the 90s and are winning consistently, but yet teams are still struggling to win in Asia. So you had this excitement of the 1990s now with Shane Warne, a spinner for Australia. Usually the Indians are producing the spinners, but now it's Australia. So you've got this great, fantastic spinner. You've got the Waugh brothers. Everyone liked them. There were further attraction because of the fact that they were twins, made it much more interesting. You've got Glenn McGrath, and then Adam Gilchrist towards the end of the decade now comes in and starts lifting Australia even to higher standards. And then you've got the Mark Taylors, you've got David Boones, all of this, Alan Border, all this. So you now come to the series that we're talking about, and it's 2001. Australia have just won 15 test matches in a row. They have equaled the West Indies record from the 1980s of the most number of consecutive test match wins. Steve Waugh's in charge. He's at the peak of his powers. He's in his mid-30s now. He is scoring a lot more runs. He scored a lot more runs after 30 than he did before 30. You've got his brother there, Mark, probably a little bit on the wane there. Shane Warne still at the peak of his powers. A new player called Adam Gilchrist, who, even though he was approaching 30, he was very fresh to Test cricket, having started his career so late. And you've got Glenn McGrath, Jason Gillespie, and then
later had Langer. Hayden was there.
And then Hayden is coming back.
Damien
Martin, yeah. And the interesting thing about Hayden, Langer, and Martin, all products of the academy, they all started in their early 20s, but they struggled. And then they went back to playing Sheffield Shield cricket. They went back to playing county cricket, and they came back and had the most fantastic time after 30. The Australian batsmen were maturing a lot later now, and they were being recalled to the side. The Australian selectors, for whatever reason, weren't saying, you know what, let's forget them. They're over 30, they're past. Let's go and find some 21-year-olds. They didn't. They went back to these guys, and these guys, the three of them, mainly had a fantastic period after that. So they come to Australia.
Just one quick note on the Sheffield Shield thing, because at that time, especially in Australian domestic cricket, Sheffield Shield was incredibly strong. You could argue, I think, some certain Shield teams are better than international sides. I mean, if you look especially during that period, 90s, early 2000s, the likes of Brad Hodge, even Martin Love, these guys, they couldn't get a game hardly for Australia. That's how good they were. Tom Moody had a limited career. He was a wonderful white ball cricketer in particular. Brad Hodge in any other era would have played 60, 70 Test matches. So I think that's why anything that came through Shield cricket, even especially they played for some time, matured late 20s, late 30s, as the guys you mentioned, they were primed and ready for international cricket because the domestic team was so strong. I think that's, compared to what it is now anyway, I'd say.
Oh, most definitely. And in fact, that's a good analogy there with Mumbai cricket. The joke was that Indian players could get into the Indian side, but they couldn't get into the Mumbai side. And that happened to Sunil Gavaskar. Yeah, Sunil Gavaskar, he came back from a tour, he was playing for India. He said he couldn't get into the Mumbai side. He was in the 14. He couldn't play, even though he's representing the country. He can't get into the domestic things. And again, with the Australian structure, Mumbai was just one city as a state team within the whole of India. Australia, you had New South Wales, Victoria. You had a strong base across 6 or 7 teams that were, as you say, full of great batsmen. Bowling was a bit weak. If you took McGrath and Warne out, the bowling stocks were not actually that high, but the batting was incredible. Their second team batsman would beat any other team at that time, any other international team at that time. So Australia arrived there, and I think that one of the most fond memories of that before that series is that tied test in Madras, which was only the second tied test match in history, down in Chennai as it is called now. From that side that was now playing in 2001, Steve Waugh was the only remnant from there. For them to play in that cauldron and in Chennai, the heat is such that you're going over 40 Celsius. Dean Jones, who scored that 210, he had lost 7 kilos. He was on a drip at the end of it. And I think when Australia went there, I get the feeling that it hardened them as players, and they wanted to excel because of the difficulty and conditions. They only say Colombo is more difficult to play cricket in. And there's a sewer, I don't know if it's still there, but there's a sewer surrounding the Madras cricket ground, and the stench, apparently, I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, was overbearing for the players. So they had to cope with that, and then the heat. And I love the story there when Dean Jones was, on his last legs, literally, and he said to Alan Border, who was batting with him, he said, "Look, I can't carry on." And Alan Border, who was from Queensland, Dean Jones, Victoria, and Alan Border said, "Well, fine, we'll get a real Australian out here at Queensland." And Dean Jones said, "I'll stay." And he stayed. He urinated in his pants a few times. He threw up, and God bless him, he just died only 6 months ago. He would turn 60 last week. A real shame. Dean Jones passed away at the age of 59. But I think that really, that sort of trench warfare really, and that was just before that 86, 87 Ashes when they got trashed by Mike Gatting's England, that really formulated in Alan Border's mind what kind of player he wanted. And he wanted the likes of Dean Jones and Steve Waugh in the trenches with him. And then, so Steve Waugh now takes over the side. Alan Border's finished, Mark Taylor's finished. And now Steve Waugh comes to India. And Steve Waugh has a new sort of mantra where there was probably unfair accusations under Mark Taylor that once Australia won the series, they didn't really care about the dead rubbers at the end of, they were already 3-0 up. They didn't really care about test matches 4 and 5. But with Steve Waugh, he wanted to win everything, whichever ODI it was, whichever test match, there was a real urge to win. And, that's the 15 tests in a row is indicative. So it's kind
of true, though, isn't it? I kind of remember, especially when Australia would come to England. I remember 1997 at the Oval, the 5th test match, and Australia required 130 to win. And Phil Tufnell, of all people, Tuffers won a test match. I remember that test match. I do. It was like, you're right. I mean, you take the foot off the pedal, but that's, to be honest with you, I think that's a predictive of any kind of sport, no matter what it is. Cricket, we see a lot of long series, but I think when you push yourself to the edge, to win especially like an Ashes, how competitive and tiring it is mentally and physically. I think at the end of the series, it's kind of normal to drop off a little bit, and just generally speaking. And we saw that obviously in the Ashes 2 years ago here. Tim Paine's led Australia. They retained the Ashes, but they never won the series, which is surprising to me because they haven't won since 2001. So you would have thought, yes, they went into that 5th test match 2-1 up, but at least win the test match to be the first Australian side to win what would have been 18 years. But they still couldn't do that, could they? Obviously, they lost a Test match and drew the series, but they went on with the Ashes. But it's still not the same, I don't think. Winning with a 2-2 draw. But I think the criticism towards Taylor for dropping off per se is a little bit harsh. I think that's just quite natural sport.
And I think also it's interesting is that in most other sports that once you win, you don't have to play the rest of the series. Like, in tennis, you win 3 sets. You don't have to play sets 4 and 5. Football, it doesn't work like that. Actually, no, in the Premiership.
It does. I mean, you could be 5-0 up after 45 minutes, after half time, and then win the game 5-3. But you still won. You can see, you've lost your second half 3-0. You could say. I just think it's a natural mental thing, just in our psyche, to drop off when, especially you push yourself to the edge, like I was saying before. But anyway, so I'm digressing a little bit. Carry on.
So Steve Waugh came, and the other thing about Steve Waugh is that he has a huge affinity with India. He set up a charity in Calcutta for those who are underprivileged, and that charity has gone from strength to strength, and it's really commendable on Steve Waugh's part. So I think we should give him that credit, which he so deserves, for helping the unfortunate. So you've got Steve Waugh, who's a real person who's interested in traveling and wanting to know about new cultures, and India like that. They receive people like that who want people to understand them as a people. The players who come and just want to stay in their hotel room and just show kind of like a dismissive attitude towards India. Maybe, I've heard stories when England went to India in 92, 93. One of the players said, "Oh, this place is a toilet. I want to go home." That kind of attitude you bring sort of spreads across the whole the whole team, and it just brings everyone. Here, Steve Waugh is out there. He's trying to interact with the players, like Hansi Cronje did. People would probably say Hansi Cronje was probably doing other things as well with some.
I was going to say, yeah.
We would go there, so maybe he was a bad example. So Steve was there, and they go in and they play the first test, and they win handsomely in Mumbai, and the hotbed of Indian cricket. And it's now 16 test matches in a row. India, a bit shaken. It was quite an easy victory, that first test in Mumbai. And then what happens now is they go. Sorry,
do you mind quickly before you just jump into the test match itself, Rajiv? If you give a little bit of kind of background to India's form going into that test series, because I believe they lost test match against Zimbabwe in 2000. Or 2001 was it? I can't remember. They lost test match. Was it before or just after? I can't remember. But it wasn't the greatest Indian side.
No.
It was, they were facing a juggernaut, Australia, as you mentioned before. They were looking for the final frontier, which is a win in India for me is always the final frontier of any great test sides. While England was so good, obviously 9 years ago, winning there. But Australia they did that obviously 3 years later, but they didn't do it obviously in 2001, as we know. But India were not a great side. I think that's also fair to mention, isn't it?
Sure, that they weren't. John Wright had taken over in 2000 as coach, so they're probably their first foreign coach from memory, a Kiwi. And also, when they last played Australia was in Australia in the 99-2000 series under Tendulkar's captaincy, and they lost all 3 matches. And they weren't very well received there. I remember one Indian fielder on the field, he sort of strained his back while throwing it back to the infield, and the crowd were all mocking him, jeering him. It was, again, that sort of condescending kind of feel. And we'll come back to that when they returned in 2003, which we'll come back to. But the 2001, yes, India certainly weren't. But Ganguly was a fairly new captain. Tendulkar had gone. Let's not forget, there's a backdrop of the match fixing scandal. So Azharuddin had been kicked out, and he was their captain when they all came in, and now their father figure has been banned for life for match fixing. So, a bit of a turmoil there, and the BCCI had to make some tough calls. And they brought this guy Ganguly in, who was from a very affluent background. When he made his ODI debut, he made his test debut in 96, but he did actually go on a tour in 91, 92, to Australia, in fact. And apparently, I don't know how true this is, he refused to do 12th man duties because it was considered below his station, coming from that very wealthy Calcutta background. Bengali, very proud. And they put him as captain. He was probably of the Javed Miandad, Rajendra Ranatunga kind of mold. He wasn't going to lay down. He would give it back to the Aussies, just like Miandad and Ranatunga did, and are remembered for. So we had this now aggressive kind of guy, Ganguly, who would go on to annoy Steve Waugh in another series when he was always late for the toss and just doing things just to incite, just to annoy the players, just like Ranatunga would with Australia. So you had Ganguly there, captain. You had the gentleman in Rahul Dravid, that linchpin, number 3, solid as ever. Rahul Dravid. Incidentally, he didn't bat at number 3 in the second innings in Calcutta, but we'll come back to that. And then you had this new guy, VVS Laxman, fairly new. He'd been playing 5 years, but he hadn't really consolidated himself. He was sort of in and out, and I wouldn't say people would think of him. They would think Dravid, Ganguly, Tendulkar, but Laxman was sort of in the background, hadn't really come out of his shell, and not really come out of the shadow of the other 3 gentlemen. And VVS, incidentally, he's a great nephew of India's second president, Radhakrishnan, my namesake. Just I'll tell you that, but no relation. So his, the great nephew of the Indian president, second Indian president, Radhakrishnan. And VVS came from that sort of very educated kind of professional background, very measured, humble kind of family, where he's actually was going to be a doctor by profession, and with that kind of sort of grounded base, a lot like Anil Kumble, Rahul Dravid. They had that sort of base where cricket was, of course, they treated it with absolute respect, but they had that kind of educated culture, molded background in order to assist them in the situations that cricket throws up, which are not on the cricket field. So anyway, they go into Calcutta, and Australia posed a very daunting total in the first innings. I think they got, if I've got the numbers right,
445.
445, yeah. So not a match-winning score, but not a match. You're not going to lose a match if you score 4-5.
They were in trouble, weren't they, as well? Because Harbison took a hat trick, didn't he? You got Warren as a hat trick. They first hat trick by an Indian bowler, and then they were, I think, with 260 off a 7. And I think Gillespie rallied, wasn't it? I think.
And Gilchrist.
Steve Wall. Steve Wall with the scorecard I brought up here just to keep us a reference, just if we need it. But Steve Wall scored 100, 110, and it was Gillespie. Gillespie scored 47. Even Glenn McGrath scored 21 not out.
Mm-hmm.
Propelled them to 445 because they were at one point 269 for 8. Mm-hmm. So the last 2 wickets yielded 176 runs.
Yeah,
I mean that really turned the screw, didn't it, for India?
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
And remember, Calcutta at the time, the biggest cricket ground, I think Modi's ground has just overtaken that. So you've got 90,000 people, 90,000 Bengalis, and we know how passionate they are about their cricket. If you remember the 96 semi-final when they lost to Sri Lanka, or were losing and they set fire. So very passionate crowd, love their cricket just as they love their football. And then India bat, and VVS Laxman coming in at number 6, he gets 50. And then they have to follow on. And before I go on, in the history of Test cricket, only 2 sides have ever, before this event, have won the match after being asked to follow on. And both times it was England, and both times the opposition was Australia. So now we've got Australia again, but the opposition now is India. So they follow on, but what happened is John Wright said to, and VVS was one of the last men out. In fact, I think he was the last man out. And
he's got 59, didn't he, the first innings?
First innings, yeah. And as he was taking his pads off in the dressing room, assuming he was going to come in at number 6.
6 again, yeah.
Yeah, but John Wright, the New Zealand coach, said, no, you're going to go in at number 3. Now, I don't know if he has the right to make that decision over Ganguly. I don't know the dynamics of an Indian dressing room. Usually the captain says it makes those decisions. But anyway, apparently it was John Wright. And Rahul Dravid, who, if I were Rahul Dravid, who'd been playing for 5 years now, and one of probably the best batsmen and would become one, I would have been a bit thinking, well, hang on a minute. I'm still the best number 3 in India. Maybe it's not I should be going back, but Rahul Dravid, being the gentleman that he is, probably wouldn't have said anything. So he reverted to number 6, and by the time the second innings comes along, and by the time Dravid joins VVS is already around about 100 already, and they said, they met each other in the middle. What are we going to do now? And they just batted time. And if you look at the actual video footage, you go on YouTube, I tend to do that quite a bit, the way they disarmed Australia, McGrath, Shane Warne, the way Laxman played through mid-wicket rather, using his wrist, and Indian batsmen are very risky, and the way Dravid just grinded it out, and they both put on 376, and they batted the whole of the fourth day. And I didn't have access to the live TV. I was, at this time, by the way, I'm 21, 22, sort of my first job, enjoying life as a 22-year-old should. But I didn't have access to it on TV, so I was following it on the internet. And those days, no iPhones or anything, so I was literally at a laptop following the numbers and the updates. The bat of the fourth day, and that we've got that lovely picture. It's become an iconic picture of that series of both of them walking off at the end of the fourth day with those towel things around their necks. You've probably seen it, and the shirts sliding down. Yeah. It's that famous thing, and the Eden Gardens in the background. It's a beautiful picture of these two great batsmen who had etched themselves into legendary status. And I'm going to be a little bit harsh here, a little bit critical. But it's this criticism has been thrown out before, and I mentioned it to a lot of my school friends who are of Indian extraction. I said, you look at Tendulkar, he has scored more test runs, more ODI runs than anyone in the history of the game. Probably those records may not be broken. Kohli's the only one I can think who can threaten both records. How many of those runs have actually been scored when India needed it most? And I struggle to find that an answer to that. Yes, maybe that Chennai test after the terrorist attacks in 2008, that was a poignant century. They chased it down. Yes, I'll give him that. But when they really needed someone, who was it that was going to do it? It was always Dravid or Laxman. West Indies, it was Lara. These guys played match-winning innings. Ian Botham. They do it when the tough gets when it's tough. They tough it out. Tendulkar, I can't say. Probably a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this podcast. Probably getting quite angry with what I'm saying. But when it came to the,
you have a couple of comments you have to get to in a little while. A couple of comments come through. Cool.
Yes, if I was like this, India's greatest ever batsman. But anyway, so they bat the whole full day. In the morning, bit of debate on when they should declare. They're now past 600. I mean, how much longer should we? How long should India carry on? They carry on for a bit. Dravid got run out for 180. VVS 281. I mean, it's amazing that just 20 runs each, which in the grand scheme of things for their innings is nothing much. But just think, if you say, oh, Laxman got 300 and Dravid got 200, that sounds so much more than 281 and 180, even though it's like 19, 20 runs each to them. But they missed out on those huge milestones. And you rarely get someone scoring a triple century in a winning cause. Graham Gooch is the only one I can think of off the top of my head. So all the others are drawn test matches. So
David Warner against Pakistan, I think recently, but yeah.
Listen, generally, you don't get triples that are winning test matches. And then it all sets up for the two last sessions, and Harbhajan comes in. Gilchrist gets a king pair. Some would argue that decision was a bit dubious. Tendulkar actually did pick up 3 wickets, so I'm not going to hide behind that. And
didn't Australia use 9 bowlers in India's second innings? Even I think Langer and Hayden even bowled a couple. They used 9 bowls in there. Yeah, it's crazy.
So, and then that whole energy of Calcutta, that was a huge boon to the game. And now, from reading John Wright's autobiography, they didn't go out and celebrate. They had to go on to some kind of event that they had to see. And he was so angry about it. He said, we didn't get to celebrate it properly and, bring in all the families and talk about it. We had to go to some stupid sponsorship event. But anyway, they did that. So it's 1-1 now, and it's a 3-test series, remember. And they now go to Chennai. And Chennai, probably the most knowledgeable crowd in India, very respectful to the opposition. They're not probably as wild and as crazy as, Bengal or Mumbai or Delhi. They're a bit more reserved, and they enjoy good cricket. They're probably most closely to something at Lord's, I would guess, the kind of atmosphere you'd get there. And again, they won, but they just scraped over the line. Won by 2 wickets, and it was another close encounter, close retreat. And now this series launched that sort of, or relaunched or crystallized that rivalry between India and Australia. It had already been called the Border Gavaskar Trophy for a few years, but now this was taking more prominence. And as the West Indies declined, and the Sir Frank Roll Trophy, which is what Australia and West Indies compete for, I mean, now, with all due respect to the West Indies, I'd love to see them back again, but I don't think anyone really cares about that Worrell Trophy anymore, which is a real shame because obviously a legend of the game, and quite rightly it was named after him between the two sides. But now, after the Ashes, the Border Gavaskar Trophy, to reference the 2 batsmen who got to 10,000 runs first, Gavaskar first, then Border, and it's a great name for the trophy, has taken on such a significant role. And you saw, just this winter, how much interest and energy was there, even with COVID, about how India and Australia are going to compete. And it's a series that I now always look forward to seeing, and I think we can be thankful for that 2001 series. And it didn't just stop there. There was a lot of other things that happened after that, and that love-hate relationship between India and Australia continued, as it probably had done.
We saw in 2008, didn't we, culminate
2008, yeah,
in that incident between Harbhajan and Andrew Simons.
Exactly.
So it's always been quite heated between them, hasn't it?
There's been a rocky kind of relationship, but there's been really good bits in between that been stitched in. So some of the, if we look at the negatives, which we have to, we don't want to talk about negatives, but we have to bring it into context. Having Greg Chappell, an Australian, as Indian coach, didn't go down at all. And I think Greg Chappell, when he came in, he and I can understand what he's saying here, because I've worked with a lot of Indians from India in a consultancy capacity. And you have to be mindful of how you approach and you tell them or speak to them or connect with them or collaborate with them and work. And Greg Chappell probably didn't understand that. In a Western dressing room, you can use swear words, insulting, to get the point home, and the shouting and that's okay in a changing room in Australia and England. Within an Indian dressing room, you have to show respect. And there's also the issue of respect between the seniors and the juniors. So Greg Chappell would probably have spoken to Tendulkar in the same way he would have spoken to a newcomer at that time. Now, in England, you can do that because there is quite a level playing field nowadays within an England dressing room. Australia, there's no hierarchy in that sense. But with an Indian dressing room, there is. Tendulkar, Ganguly, Dravid will be spoken to differently. That's just the way it is to a junior player. And now it's going to be Virat Kohli will be spoken to a different way to a newcomer. So probably Greg Chappell didn't get those cultural nuances, and he probably rubbed a lot of people on the back up the wrong way. And Ganguly, coming from his very affluent kind of background, that didn't help either. So they definitely, wasn't surprised when they clashed. So that was probably one of the negatives. You mentioned that the Andrew Simons things with Harbhajan, that didn't help. That the monkey gave a very sour taste in our mouths. No one wants to see that kind of racial abuse on either side. But then you've got to look at the positives. So with IPL, which everyone knows my thoughts on T20, but the point is IPL has brought players together. So you've had Harbhajan and Andrew Simons playing in the same team. I think it's Mumbai Indians, patching up their differences, understanding. You've had Brett Lee now playing a role in Bollywood movies. So again, that cultural gap has now been sort of shortened, and people are starting to enjoy. The Australians are starting to enjoy going to India and interacting with them, and that's probably reflected in the fact that some of the Australian players of late are of South Asian ancestry. You've got Usman Khawaja, who I think is Pakistani. You've got Ashton Mugger, who is of Sri Lankan extraction, and then you have
Forward Alam, who was even Pakistani, played for Australia briefly. Forward Alam. I think also what I don't get is obviously the coaching. Australian coaches in the IPL. Jerry Bayliss won the IPL in 2014 with Kolkata. Tom Moody was a long-standing coach of Sunrisers Hyderabad. Won it for them in 2016. Is now as part of the management team. He's stepped down. But he's now obviously Jerry Bayliss is now the coach of Hyderabad, but he's part of the management team there. So there's a strong Australian influence. Shane Warne, as we know, was one of the mentors and coach, and first IPL winning captain in 2008 of Rajasthan Royals. The Indians seem to love Australian players, it seems, as well. I look at the fact of some, I don't need to go into selection issues here, but like Adil Rashid, for example, I don't see how the guy can't bag an IPL gig, but the likes of Adam Zampa can get one. I don't see how Adam Zampa's a better leg spinner than Adil Rashid. I really don't. And also Adil Rashid's a better batsman, in my opinion, as well. So I just think there's definitely, I think, Australian and Indians, I think what it is two very competitive, extremely strong, cricketing cultures throughout both countries. These behemoths of cricket, Australia dominated cricket and ran cricket for decades. And now in India, like it or don't like it, they run cricket now as well. They're holding all the aces. That's a fact. Whether they do it for the right or the wrong, it's not something to talk about today, but that's just the truth. And I think Australia have realised you have to embrace India, like the rest of the world does as well, if you want to have a reasonable footing in the international game. So I think there's a mutual respect, I would say, between Australia and India now, where I think previous times, I think we discussed on previous shows, Rajiv, I've always felt that, Australia and India, particularly, England, have looked down on subcontinental countries, to be completely frank. We can go Tony Gregg and grovel comments and stuff like that with West Indies, but I felt there's always been a way, this is our game, and we're allowing you to play our game, as in from the England, Australia, with the Asian countries. But now, I wouldn't say tables have turned, but that's no longer the case at all. And I think Australia have realised that.
Sorry, no. That's a very good point. But I'd also like to translate what you just said onto a regional level within India. So you look now, the Mumbaites, if that's how you pronounce, no, the Marathis rather. Sorry, apologies. They thought, well, we play cricket the correct way, and they probably had that arrogance within the Indian community, within that whole subcontinent. But now you're looking at players who are coming out from all the sort of the outstations, if you will, the smaller cities. It started with Delhi, which was not traditionally a cricket hotbed. You've got players from there, and now you're getting players from all of the sort of the backwaters of India who are coming through and doing very well. Some from very humble backgrounds, like Rohit Sharma. I looked it up. He came from his parents couldn't afford to send him for cricket coaching. He didn't come from a Ganguly kind of family. So whilst I understand what you're saying from a global thing, sort of an England-India thing, within India, the Mumbais are now losing that they've lost that sort of stronghold when Mumbai used to win every single Ranji Trophy and produce. I heard a stat that Mumbai batsmen have scored 1/3 of Indian of all the runs scored by Indian batsmen. 1/3 come from Mumbai batsmen. That shift is now changing when you've got players, from other cities and states contributing. India's a huge place, 1 billion, and over 1 billion. So it's worked on that level. So maybe in the same way that India are now standing toe to toe with England and Australia, well, you know what? The other states in India are now saying, well, Mumbai, you are not that strong anymore. We can take you on, and we can produce better players. And it's great. And another example, Gujarat. Hardly any Gujaratis have played cricket for India. However, in the last few years, Gujarat have now started to produce players. And Sunil Gavaskar has mentioned that Gujarat are now becoming to show, and that they can they were bullied by probably the Mumbai team. Now they're becoming the bully and producing this wonderful bowler, Patel. I mean, how good was he? Yeah, Patel.
Exceptional Test series.
Exceptional Test series. It's a shame that he's 27. I thought, with India, he would be like 20 when he made his debut. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
He can still carry on. So other state, there's more to India now. It's a more encompassing game. It's not just for the elite. Whether it's bringing people from all different communities together, which is what India should do. Because apart from the army, cricket is the only thing that unites India. It's 14 different languages officials. So we're talking about 100 other languages, and culturally they're so diverse. A guy from Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and Chennai.
I think Natarajan. I think he's Tamil. I think Natarajan. He's from very humble beginnings. I think Mohammed Siraj as well. He lost his father recently during the Australia tour. Like you said, I think it's not just a case of the elite individuals from the country are finding a way through. It's people from all kind of backgrounds, which is great. I mean, it's good to see. I mean, this is all obviously leading back, roads lead back to Test series, as you feel, Rajiv, isn't it? That propelled the kind of changing culture towards obviously Indian cricket, and just generally, I think the relationship between Australia and India was cemented, but I think it also changed to a certain extent as well. I think, as you mentioned before, Australia was behemoth of the side, and India broke that. They were the ones who were able to kind of release the shackles off their stronghold in international cricket. Australia's stronghold, stronghold. I think it was really important. I mean, obviously Australia got their revenge, obviously 3 years later, in 2004-5 series. Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I'd love to do a piece on, some of the time, a video on Ganguly's role in that series, because there's so much that went behind the scenes there, where he was sick for that final Test match, where I would drive it to pick up the pieces, and as they were about to lose a series, and that down to his pride, which, as people say, comes before a fall, right? But anyway, I just wanted to kind of round up with going back to that Test series, really, Rajiv. It was I think also the second Test match, we said before, they won by just 2 wickets, which really capped off an incredible Test series. I mean, that everyone remembers Kolkata, but the third Test, in Chennai was also incredible. You know,
It was. And it sort of said afterwards, it said, like, why are we playing 3 test match series? Let's cut down on the ODI part of the tour. Let's play a 4 test. I mean, for me, I would say this trophy, the Border Gavaskar, is worthy of a 5 test match series in both nations. And we can cut down on the ODIs. I'm not going to even talk about T20. Have a couple of 3 ODIs to whet the appetite, and then go straight into the Test series with proper tour games. But that's out of the scope of this. But just to say that after that series, 01, almost Dravid and Laxman repeated it in Adelaide in 2003-04. There were 76-4, and then this time Dravid got the double and Laxman got the 148, I think it was. And then they met each other in the World Cup final just a year before that. So there was a lot of India-Australia, a lot of rivalry. They meet each other in the World Cup final. Okay, the final was one-sided, Australia won. But there was a lot of energy, a lot of anticipation. And England at the time, who were losing and not winning the Ashes until 05, it became more interesting than the one-sided Ashes series. And I hope that, again, after last winter, we can see that the interest is still there. And I hope they continue to nurture this series and make it a 5 test series. And I think we've got the Border Gavaskar name of the series. It should stay as that. And then in terms of the man of the series awards, maybe we could come up with one for that, like a Dravid medal, and from Australia, a Warne medal, just like the Compton and Miller medal for the Ashes. So something like that, just to add on it. But I'm looking forward to seeing Australia play India again. I've only seen it once, and in 04 when I was 25. So yeah, I want to see it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have it. I was a dream of mine really to go to India, watch cricket, any stadium. Eden Gardens would be an absolute, would just be beyond the dream. Really, it's incredible to watch cricket there. I'm sure I will at some point. And I think it's just. I just wanted to mention as well. I think this Test series as well. It didn't derail the juggernauts. Australia went on to be dominant in cricket for a number of years afterwards. I mean, they had hiccups along the way, obviously, the 2005 Ashes, but they corrected that with the smashing of in England 18 months later, as we know, 06 or 07, the 5-0. It wasn't really until kind of like 2008-9 when they lost to South Africa at home, 2-1 in that series, a fantastic series that was. That was when South Africa started to come to the fore. They obviously started in 2006. They started to push towards, the number 1 mace, which they got in 2012, 6 years later, but South Africa seemed to take the place of Australia as the side outside the subcontinent, which was the dominant force. Obviously, it was aligned with England, who came towards the back end. But Australia started to fade away, I felt, of the subcontinental teams that were non-subcontinental sides that were the dominant force. Australia were there and thereabouts. Even after this Test series, I said they got the revenge 3 years later, or 4 years later. And they can continue to be dominant for another years, which just kind of really puts into perspective how great a Test series victory this actually was for India. It was a phenomenal effort. It's a really very formidable side. Just before we go, Rajiv, I just want to bring up a couple of comments. I mean, they're really tongue-in-cheek, to be honest with you. Is it Les Fleurs or Les Fleurs? I'm not sure. But wasn't Gooch better than Gower? So, what are your comments?
I'm trying to work out who that could be. I don't know who that is, but wasn't Gooch better than Gower? For everything, David Gower being my hero, whenever I bump into Graham Gooch now at Lords or whatever, he comes up to me, like the greatest run scorer in history comes up to me, because he's seen me at events. He probably thinks I'm stalking him, and he's made a joke, do you like me more than Gower? But I think I'll just have to I'll have to leave that question for now.
I was doing a 3-3-3 in 1990 with Graham Gooch too. I had the video, because that's how old I am. I had the video cassette. You obviously don't remember VCR. I had all these tapes. I remember I had a Gooch's Indian Summer. I bought for like £4 from the W.H. Smith as a kid. I must have been about 12 or something. I remember buying that for like a bargain basement or something. I watched that video so many times.
I know every shot.
Oh, it's an amazing video. That was like 3 hours long. I remember just being so excited to see I would flip it around the runtime, like 180 minutes of these highlights of Gooch's batting with Marsh Barker running in at like 73 miles an hour, just trying to do it. Oh, they were. That was real passion for cricket as a kid. The best, the absolute best. And Will's still here, but Will, if you're here, mate, good to hear from you again. Will runs a cricket and a football YouTube channel, very successful actually as well. Does really good stuff. Whereas Aaron, not tonight, mate. This is for the oldies. This is people who live the cricket, not just obviously researching and reading about it, which I respect obviously, but this is for the oldie show, mate. Just going reminiscing for me and Rajiv, us old timers, going over fantastic series that we were around to watch, and very privileged to watch. So but Aaron, I'm sure you're back on the show at some point. So, but hopefully if you are around, Will, hopefully you enjoy the content today. Anyway, Rajiv, before we go, is there anything else you just want to wrap up with? Any final comments?
I just wanted to say there was one other thing I just wanted to mention is that we've got to think of it also in the context of population. You got Australia, 25 million max in a country, a huge country, and India probably a third the size of Australia, 1.1 billion. And with Australia, remember, you go into an Australian dressing room, West Coast, East Coast, there's not really too much of a difference. They all speak the same language culturally. And I think when Australians and all Westerners went to India, they just assumed, oh, you know what, they're all the same. I mean that in a derogatory way, but they'll all be speaking the same language, following the same religion. It's all the same. And I think now they're understanding that, it's actually the United States of India that is playing. And much like the West Indies, where they all have different backgrounds, different languages, they eat differently, for goodness sake. The food can be quite different. And I think Australians are now beginning to realize that and realize that, I read Matthew Hayden's autobiography. He said, I'll be watching a movie when he was at the IPL, Chennai Super Kings. He said, we had Murali in the team and we had a couple of others. The movie was in Tamil and half the Indians didn't understand it. And then there was a Hindi movie and, half the Indians didn't understand, the other half of the Indians didn't understand. And it's just interesting to see how that dynamic works across that huge, vast landmass, which effectively is the United States of India, like Europe. And I think if Australians, because they've now understood that, and England, I think that's going to help bridge those kind of gaps and help India bridge the gaps internally as well, which I think is important.
Excellent point to round up the show, Rajiv. Rajiv, if you want to point out maybe where can we find you or see your pieces online?
Well, the Cricketer gave me a column. To be honest, I haven't written for them for a while, but if you just do a Google on my name and Cricketer, that's the cricket related stuff. And then in the Cricketer magazines, again, probably last year was the last time I've written. So I've had letters probably about 50 times in there. The one article, what article is not letter, is October 2018, when I did an article on my former cricket coach, Harry Laxman, who coached me at Merchant Taylors. He played for Middlesex and Nottinghamshire and was this close to playing for the West Indies and this close to playing for England, but he missed out for reasons you'll find out in that article. And then non-cricket, you can Google my name with Financial Times and see my letters in there. I'm just trying to get an article in. I've only done letters. Articles that's another step ahead, which I think is a little bit beyond me at the moment. But if you just do Google my name, you'll find lots of references to me. Some good, some bad.
And Rajiv's also, should say as well, should plug him. He's got a YouTube channel as well. They're really, really interesting little snippets of his life, and they're very varied. I saw one the other day. I actually thought Rajiv was in Miami for a second. I thought he popped over to Miami because there's like these with these two women, these two like very attractive women, to be fair, American women. And it's just this quick video, and I was like, "What? Have you just nipped over to Miami? What, during COVID? Like, I know things are a lot more open there." And then Rajiv was on me, we're talking about doing a YouTube video, and then he's sitting in Miami with two women. And I was like, okay.
It was Miami, but it was an old video which I forgot to upload. And I can assure you it was after my divorce and before I met my new girlfriend. So there was no way.
Sorry, I apologize. I'm not trying to get you in any hot water here. I'm just being confused really. But you'll see Rajiv's other videos, and I think he was recently at Charles Dickens' old house, and I saw you in Lords and all these monuments in the UK. But yeah, do check out. I think the YouTube channel is actually under Rajiv Radhakrishnan, at least on the name.
No, Rajiv Radha. So the first half of my surname, Rajiv Radha, all one word, and it's stuff on true crime, which I'm obsessed with, like the mafia. O.J. Simpson. I've been outside that house where he did or did not murder his ex-wife and her friend. I think he did. History. I've got a real interest in history, and so does my partner. So we go to all these castles and everything. And she's actually, unfortunately, she's the poor person who has to video these things. Not the Miami girl one. But
I was going to say. She's a legend. She's happy to video that one, isn't she?
It's yeah, I think I've got like 600. I've got now 123 subscribers. So maybe they'll start sponsoring me. So yeah, the more people I get, the better. So yeah, and lots of cricket interviews with. I've got one with Graham Gooch, and I'm flying an aeroplane across the thing. So and he found it funny. So in a dig at the David Gower thing when he flew an aeroplane when Graham Gooch was captain in Australia. So that was a slight little joke with him. So yeah, yeah, just do my name and you'll see all those videos.
Let's go check it out, guys. Go subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, once again, Rajiv, thank you so much. Very interesting conversation this was. Always an interesting conversation with you, Rajiv. It's a bit different to what my normal content on here about the current affairs of cricket and what's going on, today's game. But it's really nice to actually go back, 20 years. So when I was a teenager and just reminisce of what it was an incredible test match and a really watershed moment in test cricket, I think, especially between India and Australia. So yeah, I'll leave it there, guys. So if you like the content, I always say, do like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, if you're new to the channel, if you're a friend of Rajiv and you're on here because that, still feel free to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully I will see you guys on the next one. All right, cheers. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Shay. Thank you.